The discussion around whether or not the world is overpopulated or underpopulated, or people are having too few children or too many children, is a rather old one, all things considered. It goes back at least 50 years, maybe even longer. And depending on the period of time, during these 50 or so years, you're going to get very, very different answers. Obviously, it goes without saying that matters such as these, questions such as these, inevitably become political. So typically, people who have very strong views of the one or the other, for example, I think that people are having way too few children, everything's below replacement, blah, blah, blah. Typically, they are politically animated. And people who think having children is bad and the world is overpopulated, they're also typically very politically motivated and animated as well. I, for my part, I don't know. I am not a population scientist. I don't cling to a particular view on this. I'm not sure. The question around whether or not having children is bad or good, matters of antinatalism, I want to cover in a separate video. But I just don't know whether or not people are having enough children or they are. And it seems to me, from my vantage point, that a lot of this is contextual. For example, to run a medieval city or village, you need far fewer people than you need to, say, run a modern Tokyo or Seoul, Korea, right? It's very, very different. So generally speaking, when people are very alarmist, which maybe is justified, maybe it's not, these people are looking at it from the angle of, given our modern infrastructure, given our modern amenities, given our social programs, pensions, welfare, etc., given all this, people are not having enough children, i.e., it's all below replacement. Okay, fair enough. And it's in that spirit, based on that assumption, that, in fact, according to some people, we're not having enough children and everything's below replacement, that I want to try to talk about this and tackle the problem, because it's come up so frequently in recent years. There's been a resurgence of talk about this specific topic. And I think very few people, at least in the public or Normieville, are willing to take the bull by the horns and address the elephant in the room, which we'll get to in a little bit. So here we are, in fact, working with the premise that people are having too few children and it spells disaster for the future. And there are a lot of things that tie into this. Like I said, antinatalism is a separate discussion. But of course, basically, this goes back to a key part of civilization itself, namely the observation that when things get good, when civilizations develop and advance, when the technology is sufficient, people almost automatically choose and are inclined to have far fewer children than they used to. And anyone and everyone worth their salt who's looked at this can observe this. Look at third world countries, for example, sub-Saharan Africa. They're not having fewer children. And before industrialization in Europe, people had tons of children. Children are, at baseline, in civilizations and settings that lack the robust technological and social infrastructure that we have in the West, an asset. They're a labor asset in the sense that you get them to work as early as 8, 9, 10 in some cases. They're an asset in terms of taking care of you. They're an insurance policy for when you're older, later on. And they're also an asset in as much as childhood mortality and infant mortality prior to the industrial era and even after it and during it, very, very frequent. Again, children represent this multi-pronged asset beyond, of course, the innate desire to reproduce that I'd argue not everyone has, separate discussion, but they're seen as a necessity. And in a culture and society that has a lot of those basic needs covered, pensions, social welfare programs, schooling, for example, it took a long time to make child labor illegal in various Western countries, to send them off to factories, because that, for untold millennia, was the norm. They didn't wait until you were 18. You were 8, 10, maybe tops 11. You could work, and they sent you off to work and get the things done that they deemed were necessary. Well, that's not the world we live in anymore. The natural development and evolution of having fewer children due to industrial society and advanced medicine and social programs and all that jazz. But the real elephant in the room is quite simply the question, what are we going to do about it? And there doesn't seem to be a good answer to this. Many things have been attempted, but nothing seems to work. There are entire government infrastructures which attempt to pay people to have children. Does it work? No. South Korea is probably the industrial country with the biggest quote-unquote below replacement problem, even worse so than Japan, if you can imagine that. And the government has actively offered to pay people, give them money to have children. And guess what? It doesn't work. People are still not having children. And this could mean one of two things. Perhaps the sum being offered in the respective country is just not sufficient, and maybe they need to up it. Maybe, for example, if government said, we'll pay you $1 million a kid, then people would want to have children. Of course, they would be primarily motivated by the money in this case, but nonetheless, many people would then be incentivized to have children. Or it could be that no matter how much money you pay them, people are not going to have children just because you're paying them to have children. And never mind about things such as offering family support and tax deductions and you name it. That certainly is not going to be sufficient if governments are willing to actually pay for children. And in the case of South Korea, it's about $740 a month, which is not a lot considering how expensive children are. So that is not going to be enough to motivate people. $1 million lifetime, or maybe $10,000, $20,000 a month, no, sure. But that probably is never going to happen. Governments are just not going to do that. So at base, we just don't know how to get people to have children, how to be motivated to have children. The people who are naturally inclined to have children are going to have them regardless. That's part of this other discussion. But what about the people who, quote unquote, need to have children, at least to fulfill the requirement to be above replacement? Well, there's no solution for them. Now, of course, this directly ties into the mating and dating crisis, because let's be honest, one of the reasons why people are having children is because women are ultra-selective and fewer people are coupling together to produce them. And even when they do, frequently, whether for political reasons, ideological reasons, or personal reasons, women elect not to have them. Okay, does anyone have a solution? Well, here's the thing nobody wants to talk about, and it's unfortunate, but I don't see any other way around it. And I'm not even advocating for this because I'm on the fence. I don't know if people are having insufficient numbers of children or if they're having too many children. I don't know. I don't claim to be an expert there. I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who would claim to be that. I don't believe them. But here's the thing. The only way you can incentivize people to have children is to force them to have children, vis-a-vis some kind of dictatorship. The CCP, which had bungled the whole issue with the one-child policy, could see itself at some point in time in the future in a position where people will be required to have children per government mandate. Now, that sounds totally dystopian from our perspective in the West, but it's entirely possible that the CCP says you are required by law to have at least 2 children if you're a woman. Now, this also plays in something else. But one of the reasons why you're probably never going to get anything totalitarian or dictatorial or anything foisted upon anyone is because women are the ones who give birth, and no one is willing to put pressure on women, ever. If it were men or the equivalent, there would absolutely be some kind of government incentive forcing men to do something because nobody gives a rat's buttocks about men. But in the case of women, well, we're not going to put pressure on them, whatever. No one is willing to concede the unfortunate seeming necessity that you would need government mandates and actual requirements to force people, specifically women, to have children, whether they want them or not. And I'm not saying that's good, but that is what would be required, because otherwise there's no solution. Again, I'm not endorsing government mandates or forcing people to have children, but I don't see any other way if, in fact, the below replacement narrative is accurate, because otherwise women are way too picky, People make decisions that are expedient to them. They don't think about the macroscopic consequences. And there's just no other way around this as far as I can see. And of course, no one in the mainstream is going to mention this. So talking about the problem, encouraging people, isn't going to do anything. You either pay them a boatload of money beyond what any government would ever be willing to do, or governments that are totalitarian simply force people, specifically women, to have children against their will and within a certain time frame, say prior to 30. That's never going to happen. And I'm not suggesting that it should happen, but that's probably what would need to happen if you want to ensure the future with sufficient number of children who later become adults who contribute to the system, inasmuch as the hypothesis of below replacement is true. Not even the people who are ideologically attached to the idea of having as many children as possible would be willing to force people, specifically women, to have as many children as possible. And for the record, I don't think anyone should be forced to do anything. But not even the people who harp on about this the most are willing to get their hands dirty when it comes to this stuff. So all people can do is talk about it as a potential problem. Now, here's my take in terms of my limited understanding of the situation. I think things will adjust. Systems will adjust to people having fewer children. I don't think of it as the end of the world. Maybe some things will contract. Certain social systems will change, probably irrevocably. But humanity will, at least for the time being, continue. Of course, long-term humanity is absolutely doomed. There's no question about that, obviously. But for the next couple of decades, maybe centuries, things will be okay, even without people having all these children. But please consider, if you're one of these people that really thinks people and women need to have as many children as possible, what are you really going to do about that? I see only one solution for that, and it's an unthinkable solution for the vast, vast majority of people, throughout the West at least. And probably increasingly unthinkable even for an organization such as the CCP. Anyway, as always, thank you for tuning in. Special thanks to my patrons and donors, as always. You keep the channel alive. And please don't forget all that YouTube jazz. Like the video, share the video, comment, subscribe if you're not yet a subscriber. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Until the next time, may the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.